Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp LaRouche, the founder and president of the Schiller Institute. It's May 21st, 2021. There's a lot going on, so let's get right into it. The first story we want to cover is the conference in Rome today of the World Health discussion that took place as a summit. Probably the most important thing was the address from China President Xi Jinping today, which just occurred. And Helga, I guess you have a little bit of a report on what he had to say.
Well, we were trying to create an environment around this summit, to make sure that the agenda would be on the standard which is required. So we circulated a statement by the Committee of Coincidence of Opposites, which is this organization which was created by a couple of individuals, including myself, from the Schiller Institute, to fight for a world health system, meaning a world health system in every single country. Every nation must have a modern health system, not just vaccines, not just supplies, but really to have modern hospitals, advanced doctors and nurses, and all the equipment which every country could have and therefore should have. So we have circulated that among, I would say, hundreds, if not thousands, of parliamentarians around the world, ambassadors, institutions of all kinds. So we will not know what will be the outcome of the summit for the next several days, because I think it lasts 3 days. But I got a preliminary report, and I saw actually a tiny excerpt of what Xi Jinping had to say, because he was invited by the organizers of the conference, which was the Italian government, Prime Minister Draghi, and EU President Ursula von der Leyen. They invited Xi Jinping, which makes good sense because China is the country which has the best record in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So Xi Jinping elaborated a five-point program, which I don't have the details yet of, but what was extremely important, what he said, that there must be a world health community, and that the life and health of people must be put up front and center, and that this approach must guarantee that every single life has to be protected. And I think this has been the policy, or the foundation of the policy of the Chinese government in fighting the pandemic. So I think this is a very good start. Now there are many other important leaders. I saw that the Mexican president Obrador is there. So we will give an evaluation if this summit did live up to the demand of this pandemic once it is concluded. But I think it is not enough to lift the patent. What President Biden recently said, we completely support that, and there are obviously ways how the firms can be compensated. But the question is, how do you transmit the technology transfer to the developing countries so that production sites can be erected in the countries and continents where these vaccines must be administered. So I think that this is a very important test for the ability of the world to respond to such a crisis. So I think this is a very important point because, as we have said many times, the fight against this pandemic and the recognition that this pandemic was completely unnecessary. This, by the way, has been stated by the World Health Organization, by basically saying that the governments, most of the governments, responded much too late and had a laissez-faire approach. So the pandemic would have been not necessary. We have stated that it would not have been necessary because if every country would have a hospital system like they were demonstrating in Wuhan, where if you don't have enough hospital beds, You can build a modern hospital in 1 week with 1,000 beds. That, however, requires to have plenty of electricity, energy, water, clean water, infrastructure. And that is why we will continue this fight to say, that this must be the starting point to seriously overcome the underdevelopment in the developing countries. So this is just one moment in a battle, but an important point to review.
Well, what you were just describing is a different approach than what most governments have taken. And we see now a collaboration between Russia and China, which is becoming more close, more intense, with the dialogue yesterday between Presidents Xi and Putin on the opening of construction of a nuclear project. This really is very different from the Green New Deal and what's being pushed by the unipolar system, isn't it?
Yes, it's very refreshing because, President Putin and President Xi Jinping decided to celebrate the collaboration of China and Russia in the construction of these 4 new nuclear plants with the help of Russian technology. Not only the construction as such, but to make it a point that this is the beginning of a much larger contribution of the 2 countries to work to improve the innovation for all of humanity. And Xi Jinping in particular said that they want to make a decisive contribution to such a transformation. And I think this is extremely important because if these 2 countries, one being one of the 2 largest nuclear atomic powers, Russia, and China being the 2nd largest economy and also becoming a sizable military force, if these 2 countries decide that they will go on a course of advanced technology, higher energy flux densities, and the fact is, that given the fact that their attitude is sharing a lot of projects, a lot of technology with developing countries. So this is becoming a very attractive model. And I think it really breaks this new Green Deal. And, I think it is a very good example how you can go about things in a completely different way.
Well, it's interesting from monitoring the transatlantic think tanks like the Atlantic Council, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations. They're very focused on their fears of a Russia-China military alliance. But I think what's more threatening to them is that we're seeing this potential for economic collaboration against the project of the Great Reset and Green New Deal. Now, there's a very important presentation also from Wang Yi, the foreign minister, I believe, who was talking about the need for more cooperation to help Africa. What did he say?
Well, there was a UN Security Council meeting where Wang Yi called on the international community to absolutely upgrade their efforts to help Africa to deal with the pandemic. Not just the distribution of vaccines, but everything, the supply of all medical requirements of, really helping Africa to overcome the lack of infrastructure and the lack of development, which is why it is so absolutely threatened right now, especially in light of the fact that the pandemic is really out of control in India, where a new variant developed, which is a whole crisis for India. But among other things, it has created a situation where India, which was the main supplier of vaccines for Africa, basically had to stop the export of those vaccines to Africa because it's so in need itself. So this is why Wang Yi, I think, made a very important point. This Indian situation is horrendous. They had the infection rates down in February to very few, less than 10,000 a day, which for a country of 1.3 billion was very low. But then, I think they loosened the situation up too early. They had a lot of religious festivities, and now they have these incredible infection numbers, and they are completely unequipped. It's a total crisis. There is a huge mobilization, among Indian organizations, because there are a lot of overseas Indians in the United States trying to convince Biden that he should release the 60 million doses of AstraZeneca the United States has in stockpile, which Biden has not done yet so far, which is a complete outrage. But the situation in India is very grave, because the hospitals, then by far not enough hospitals. There's no oxygen. In the rural areas, where many people have fled to, everything is breaking down, and there is now a big danger that eventually the planting season, which is now, can really not take place because of the total raving of this pandemic. And people are worried that this may lead to a severe food shortage by the fall. So this all underlines the necessity that only our approach can remedy the situation. Modern health system in every single country, but also doubling the food production, because mankind should not be in need of food, when it would be so easy to remedy it.
Now, when you talk about these positive developments that we're seeing with Russia and China, there are a couple of stories I'd like you to comment on which show the opposite. One is this incredible article in the British medical journal Lancet, which makes the argument that we cannot provide modern health systems for 5 billion people. This is the classic Malthusian approach, but it's really quite dangerous, isn't it?
Well, I think it's very revealing. This was an article which was published in 2019, so long before this pandemic erupted. But, basically, it says explicitly, that 5 billion people at that time were not having the advantage of a modern health system, and that the idea that if you would provide that this would blow up the climate for the whole planet. This is the same argument which Obama made. I think it was in 2015 or so, when he was in South Africa, in Johannesburg, in a university. And when a student asked him, what are you providing for Africa in terms of, development, Obama said, if everybody wants to have a car, air conditioning, and a big house, then the planet will boil over. So forget about it. So this is the old colonial idea, that the underdevelopment of the developing countries, the non-white parts of the world, that is certified, cemented forever, that it's only a small, preferably white elite, which has all the privileges, and that the countries of the developing sector will be kept down. And, you can cull the herd. If there are too many of those, this was discussed by Friedrich Schiller already in his writings about the laws of Solon and Lykurg, where he contrasted the model of what became the Republican model of state, typified by Solon, who, when he was asked what is the purpose of the state, he said it's the development, the progression of the people. And Schiller contrasted that to Sparta, which was the prototype of an oligarchical model, where if there are too many slaves, in this case it was the helots, well, then you can just shoot them and cull the herd. And that attitude is still what is behind the neo-Malthusian idea, everybody have a car, and in tropical climate, everybody having a air conditioning. What an outrage. So, I think this is really something, most people don't think about, that they take it somehow as granted that the poverty and the underdevelopment of the developing countries would be forever. But this is the absolute declaration of bankruptcy, because if you don't recognize that every human being on this planet has the same inalienable rights like we do, then I think you are on the wrong side of history.
Well, and the same thing was expressed by Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, who basically gave a diktat where he said that the African countries must not develop industry and instead should sell their carbon offset to the rich countries. This is the same Malthusianism, isn't it?
Yeah, this is really very outrageous, and I think it would be very good if every every country from the developing sector would really study what he said there. He did that in the context of the announcement for this COP26. This is the big climate summit which will take place in November in Glasgow in Scotland. And he said there will be an offset market, climate offset market, until the end of the year, where the most demand, 90% of the demand, will come from the firms of the industrialized country, and 90% of the supply will come from Africa, who can basically then trade off, that if they sign contracts that they will not develop their resources, that they will not develop agriculture, that they will basically not industrialize, then they will get a lot of money paid from the Western firms, to offset that, to make such a deal. So they should get money for signing treaties to not develop. And then he said, naturally, if the Western firms invest in that, then there must be permanence and integrity and transparency. So therefore, it must be controlled. And then comes along who the head of MI6, Richard Moore, who says, since climate change is the most important foreign policy goal of the British Empire, one can say, MI6 will have a worldwide surveillance that all of these contracts are being being kept. Now, this is incredible. This is an open declaration of reintroduction of colonialism, and to have a colonial police in the form of MI6 to make sure this is happening. Now, I think the countries should absolutely reject that, because why would they sign an agreement to not develop? I think people should really. I mean, I think this is not known enough, that there is such a open campaign to reintroduce colonialism in its most naked form.
And there is a plan to have a debate on the so-called climate change to get at this question of whether it's solar radiation or carbon dioxide that's the cause. This is an initiative from Italy, I think, isn't it?
Yes, this is very good, because there was a couple of months ago, I think several hundred Italian scientists who wrote letters to the Italian government, to the EU Commission, to the United Nations, by saying there is no climate emergency. The whole thing is a complete fraud. Now, out of this circle of scientists, they plan an initiative to have a public debate, whereby the two models of climate change are, basically debated. Is it the CO2 emission? Is it man-made climate change? Or is it the astronomic oscillation, which is, going on since millions of years, changing always between ice ages and warming periods, small ice ages, and as we have seen it, for really millions of years. So obviously, having just gone through this incredibly cold spring period, one would tend to think that maybe some of these Russian scientists who claim that we are in a new ice age, maybe they have a point. But apart from such temporary things, I think it's more fundamentally a question of science. And obviously, in light of this Green Deal and the Great Reset, some of these people are waking up and recognize that this is now an absolutely crucial debate to be had. So we can look forward to hear about that a lot more.
Now, there's also been a lot of focus, for obvious reasons, on the situation between Israel and Palestine, but there's also still the question of the Syrian sanctions, the destruction and policy against the people of Yemen, the continuing wars, and it does appear as though there are more people coming around to agree with what your husband said many, many years ago, that you can't have a political solution without an economic solution. And the solution we've proposed is economic cooperation. How would you propose that? How would that work?
Well, I think the situation in the Middle East is really terrible, and I think people talk a lot about, and now very passionate demonstrations, and people talk a lot about, what was the role or what is the role of Israel, but one should absolutely recognize that it was the Biden administration basically giving the green light to everything Netanyahu wanted to do, basically telling him you have as much time as you want. Um, and unfortunately, this is exactly the same thing what the Trump administration's policy was before. And I think it's completely terrible. So, you know, I mean, the plight of the Palestinians is beyond belief. I mean, if you look at the casualties, um, in any case, I don't think that there is any solution to the problem between Israel and Palestine, or the terrible situation in Syria, where the call of Cardinal Senari, saying that more than 90% of the population is in dire uh, need, because they have fallen below the poverty line because of 10 years of uh, war, because of the Caesar sanction, because of the COVID. The situation in Yemen is a complete heartbreak. Um, so we have to have development. The new name for peace is development. This is what Cardinal Senari said. And frankly, given the complexity of the region, I don't think there is any chance to solve the Israel-Palestinian crisis or any of the other situations unless there is an end to geopolitics among the large powers. Between the United States, Russia, and China, there has to be a cooperation, and then you can solve the problems in the Middle East easy, because they have been used as a cockpit for geopolitical confrontation for a very long time. And there is a plan to solve it. You have to extend the new Silk Road, which President Xi offered in 2015 when he visited Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. And he proposed to extend the new Silk Road into the whole region. There is an absolute demand coming from the Iraqis, from the Afghanis, from the Syrians, the Yemenis, to all wanting to have that kind of cooperation. And if the United States and the Europeans would stop their evil geopolitical regime change policy, which still insists that they will not help in the reconstruction of Syria until Assad is removed, this has to stop, or else we are creating a hell for everybody on earth, and maybe the extinction of the whole human civilization. Because if geopolitics is continued, we may end up in having no civilization, because the warnings that we are closer to nuclear war than at any time, at least since the Cold War, but probably beyond. Uh, Many such voices are being raised in the recent period, and I think there must be a complete change in thinking. And the more people get active, and the more people start to take responsibility, the better the chances are that we can change the situation.
Another area where there needs to be a change of thinking is the European Union policy towards China. There's been a somewhat of a debate over this recently in terms of the sanctions policy and so on. Where does this stand?
These these I don't want to use language which is juridically to be challenged. But you know what the European Parliament just did is really stupid. I mean, it's completely like the best example. Well, they just voted with a very large majority to basically stop the uh, investment agreement between China and the EU, which was basically agreed upon towards the end of last year, basically on the insistence of Merkel. So they voted to stop that. And Bütikofer, this old Maoist, one can say, because that's how he started his career. And I think his opposition to China still comes from that kind of thinking, that he didn't like the reforms of Deng Xiaoping and is still in the framework of the Cultural Revolution. In any case, Bütikofer put out a tweet saying, Chinese did shoot themselves in their own foot because now the agreement is out. And fortunately, Michele Geraci, who presently is teaching in China, answered his tweet by saying, that obviously it was the EU who requested that agreement to have more access to the Chinese markets. So who shot whom himself in the foot? Maybe if you think slapping somebody in the face is a big gain, then it is the European firms and workforce who have to pay for it. So this just shows you the absolute stupidity of the Greens in particular, but also the victims of this anti-Chinese brainwashing. And people should look at what China is doing. It's completely illegitimate how these accusations against China are being conducted, because in reality, many more countries realize that collaboration with Russia and China is to their benefit. Look what is happening right now in Central America, sort of the backyard of the United States, where Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala all want to have cooperation with Russia, with China. Uh, and they see where they get an advantage and where they're being just used for military purposes.
Helga, we have enough time to take up one more example of the absolute idiocy of greenie ideology. And this is the case of Schellnhuber and his new proposals for how construction should be done. It's hard to imagine how these guys can be treated as serious thinkers, isn't it?
Well, Schellnhuber has quite a record of polluting any place he goes to. The EU Commission got their guidelines from him on climate change. He defined a lot of Merkel's policy on climate change. He unfortunately polluted the Vatican Academy of Sciences. He influenced the present Pope Francis with his ideology. And now he, together with Ursula von der Leyen, they started a project in Weimar, of all places, trying to pollute the beautiful tradition of the Weimar classics by having now a project which they call the New Bauhaus World Initiative or something like that, whereby Schellnhuber is in the middle of calling for a radical change in the construction sector worldwide, where he wants to introduce that all the previous construction materials such as concrete, steel, aluminum, glass are all supposed to be replaced by wood and bamboo only. So his idea is that if everything goes well and everything can be put on a circular economy, that by 2050, up to 50% of all construction worldwide should only come from wood and bamboo. And what they said in a recent internet seminar, they want to convince the not developed countries to do likewise, and then they want to have 90% of all construction worldwide only woods and bamboo. Now, what that will do for the environment and the climate when you have such an incredible demand for woods, but naturally, since they want to reduce the world population to 1 billion or so, maybe they think that this can be done. It's insane. It's completely crazy, and they want to call this a new Bauhaus, movement. But to do this in Weimar is a complete assault on the best tradition Germany has, which is the Weimar classics, and it should not be tolerated.
Well, just so we don't leave our viewers with that bit of insanity, let's end by talking briefly about the Chinese rover, which is now on Mars and is now preparing for doing some exploration up there. This is really quite an exciting thing, isn't it?
Yes, and I think it shows you also how the Chinese are thinking about it, because this rover is called Shu Rong, which means the god of fire. And that is a clear reference, or it's not reference, but same idea like the idea of Prometheus, who stole the fire from from Zeus, bringing it to human beings for the benefit of their livelihood and production and improving their life. So to call it Shu Rong, by bringing that kind of power to Mars, is really beautiful. And so you have now the hope that 3 nations have a Mars mission: the United States, which also already did some tremendous breakthroughs, like having a little helicopter fly on Mars, which is incredible. The UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and now China. And we will see what this Mars mission will accomplish. So I think that's the way to go. And I think we have to look to the stars to get a perspective for the future of humanity, and not be some backward-oriented people who want to turn history back, like the Schellnhubers of this earth.
Well, we started by talking about a different approach. This is what you have been fighting for with the Schiller Institute, with the idea of a new paradigm. And we're seeing it coming into existence in spite of extraordinary efforts by the oligarchy to put us back into the dark ages. So, Helga, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, till next week.